Afternoon, everyone. Bienvenido. I want to thank you all for joining us today for our final panel of our 6-part webinar series focused on anti-racism, how time flies. My name is Patricia Lopez, and I'm assistant professor in the Kremen School of Education and Human Development here at Fresno State. We have the honor of hosting this webinar series. I'm also the director of Enseñamos en el Valle Central. I don't know if I put that in. I want to thank all of you for being here with us this afternoon. And I want to begin by acknowledging that we gather as Fresno State faculty and K-12 educators on the traditional lands of the Yokuts and Monos people, present, past, and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. Acknowledging the land is an important indigenous protocol that we are honoring here today and is an integral part of consciousness raising and explicit expressions of anti-racism, anti-racist epistemologies, and generational healing. This calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit, as well, including the recognition that these communities are still present and the struggle for sovereignty continues. With that, engaging in conversations about returning land to indigenous peoples. To all our future and current educators who are joining us today, making your way in, I want to stress the importance of land recognition as an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territories we reside on, and a way of honoring the indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the longstanding history that has brought us to reside on the land we currently occupy and to seek to understand our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Rather, colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. So I invite all of you who are listening via Zoom and on Facebook, please feel free to use the chat box, comment, or the comment box, and acknowledge the Native peoples whose lands you are currently occupying. And again, welcome. For those who have been with us in previous webinars, welcome back. If it's your first time participating in an event sponsored by Enseñamos en el Valle Central, we welcome you. I want to briefly share that we are a federal funded Title V initiative focused on cultivating future educators with a commitment to equity, justice, liberation, and anti-racism. A very integral part of our approach to cultivating future educators, or what some refer to as growing our own, is an explicit commitment to culturally and linguistically sustaining and ethnic studies pedagogies that are grounded in anti-deficit and anti-racist and anti-oppressive frameworks, valuing service to community, political awareness, and critical civic engagement for the public good. So the vision and principles that we uphold as an initiative are grounded and informed by a long history of community struggles for access to the teaching profession and an education system that reflects the racialized experiences and contributions of those it serves. A system that does away with racial, cultural, economic, and linguistic hierarchies by first owning the fact that they exist. These gatherings are an example of how we put our vision and our mission into practice, holding space for faculty and today K-12 educators who are part of teacher education and today and committed to sharing knowledge and supporting future and current educators who aspire to embody anti-racist epistemologies and educators who strive to affirm rather than condemn difference. So with that, it's important to historicize the topic of anti-racism as we always do and acknowledge that this concept has deep roots in abolition, the call to end slavery, and the call for structural changes and eradicating institutional racism in a post-emancipatory society, emancipation society. These movements are very much alive today, most notably with the Black Lives Matter movement, whereby activists and educators alike specifically invoke terms like abolition, anti-racist, and anti-racism to underscore the importance of individuals understanding historic and ongoing racial disparities and how these disparities are deeply rooted in power, policies, and practices. We must also acknowledge the long struggle for third world studies and ethnic studies, which is what we'll discuss today, and how these struggles are similarly grounded in anti-racism and decolonial epistemologies. These struggles have fundamentally contended with both society and institutions' maintenance of anti-Black racism anti-Blackness, and systemic forms of oppression that continue to marginalize Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color. As a critical and interdisciplinary study of race, ethnicity, and indigeneity, ethnic studies is concerned with the ways in which race and racism have been and continue to be powerful social, cultural, and political forces, and the connections to other axes of stratification, such as gender, class, sexuality, and legal status. I want to call in the words of my fellow CSU colleague and K-12 educator, teacher education scholar, Dr. Alison Santiago Cubales, who brilliantly centers ethnic studies pedagogy as saving lives, cultivating sacred spaces, and developing solidarity. Ethnic studies does this by building upon students' personal experiences and perspectives, developing critical consciousness, and creating caring and affirming academic and community spaces. So our discussion today and our panelists today will unpack the deep roots and intersections of ethnic studies and anti-racism. Our presenters are going to highlight how their personal journeys inform their embodiments of anti-racist epistemologies, and how the daily work that they are doing with middle and high school youth in the political mist of California's third largest school district are examples of the possibilities of anti-racist pedagogies and the profound role that anti-racist educators of color can play as agents of social change. So for those of you who are tweeting, we ask that you please use the hashtag EnseñamosPLC. You can also tag us on social media with the @FSEnseñamos handle. And let's get this party started. Let me tell you a little bit about the format. So we're going to take a little bit of a different approach. So again, tell us who you are. We want to know who you are. If you can share, if you're one of our pre-service educators or current educators, share in your chat what grade level and content area you teach. Each of our panelists will have about 12 to 15 minutes to present. After each of the panelists present, we're actually going to do a short group dialogue, which the panelists are going to kind of further weave their presentations together. Then we'll open up for a Q&A session. So you can use the Q&A box. And if you're on Facebook Live, Maribel from the Enseñamos team will take your comments. You can use the comment box and she'll send those questions on over. And if you have a question for a specific panelist, please feel free to note that in your question. We will be monitoring the chat as well. So if anybody puts in a profound comment or question, we will surely try to facilitate that as well. So please, during the presentation, we encourage you use the chat for discussion, build community. This is your space. This is a shared space. So please go for it. So now it is with complete honor and pleasure to introduce a phenomenal group of educators. Our panelists today are all founding members of the Fresno Ethnic Studies Coalition, which is a grassroots collective of educators, students, and community who are dedicated to establishing and who have and are in the process of establishing ethnic studies in Fresno Unified School District. First in our lineup, we have Uciel Jimenez, who's an ethnic studies educator at Sunnyside High School. He's also an historian and just a down-ass homie. Welcome, Uciel. Next, we have Lauren Bill, who's an ethnic studies and African-American studies teacher at Edison High School. Lauren spearheaded the introduction of ethnic studies at Edison High by championing African-American studies as a course. In addition, her work in social science and ethnic studies field, she's also advised multicultural clubs such as the Black Student Union and the UJIMA program. Did I get that right, Lauren?
UJIMA program.
Thank you, Lauren. Next in line, we have Fernando Santillan, who is a teacher of Chicano-Chicanx studies at Edison High. Fernando established and wrote the curriculum for Chicanx studies and also teaches race and social justice as an alternative to the U.S. history graduation requirement here in California, Central Valley, representing. He also established a Mecha chapter at his school. Rounding out our panel is Amy Sepulveda, who's a middle school teacher at Fort Miller Middle School. She's also the founder of the Chicanx Latinx Student Association on campus, which is designed to preserve the cultural identity and improve the academic journey of youth through community support, equitable curriculum, and exposure to cultural events. Amy's also dedicates her time to Fresno State's Chicano Alumni Club. She's an executive board member where she works to raise money for scholarships to benefit Chicano, Chicanx students in higher education. So with that, let us be inspired to think differently about how we embody and enact anti-racism in and out of school settings. Gracias for being here. Uciel, you're up.
Oh man, I can't believe I'm finally here. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. My name is Uciel Benjamin Jimenez, originally from Culiacan, Sinaloa, even though I was born in Tijuana. So hopefully, whoops, I think I'm sharing my screen, but something's happening here where it's like frozen. So you're gonna have me. Okay, there we go. So I'm titling this "How to Be an Anti-Racist Educator While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood." Now, thankfully, I don't have access to the chat box right now. You can still fill it in, but some people are writing some craziness on there. So to you, that's probably funny, and that's fine. But to the people on this panel, this is kind of like serious business. And while I'm a person who loves humor, please try to keep those comments appropriate and responsible is what I'm asking for. So I'm not going to go through a list. Obviously, nobody can unmute yourself and start. First of all, can you see me and hear me? That's kind of important. Can you all see me and hear me? Just if anyone can unmute yourself and let me
Yes,
know.
we can.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So just starting with this, we did, in fact, the people on this panel and Amy, who will be here later, create the Fresno Ethnic Studies Coalition, Seeing a Need. So let's go ahead and begin. All right, so first I want to start with some trigger warnings, not necessarily for the people that you might think are usually triggered. So we will use words that you are maybe not accustomed to hearing in an educational program, or maybe you are, depending on the program that you belong to and your experiences with it. So just like my classroom, what we have here is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, which is why we have that. Let me get my little point in there. You will hear the phrase white people. Now, this is not to malign any group of people. People of color are used to hearing their group or culture or ethnicity phrased a specific way, but I have found that among speaking with adults that white people are not very comfortable or it's not very common to have that out. So here's some more vocabulary, some oppression, liberation, segregation. You might have heard it as spoken of as good schools or good neighborhoods. Anti-racism as opposed to diversity. So what you're seeing is on the right side of this, kind of a more milquetoast, moderate way to have these conversations. Well, this is not going to be that. And of course, privilege. Privilege comes in all ways, shapes, or forms. I myself am extraordinarily privileged. I am straight, I am male, I am cisgender, I am middle class. And so a lot of the things that I don't have to worry about, other people do have to, and I'm able-bodied. And so I like to use this example for my students since I teach race and social justice, which is an option you can take for United States history here at Fresno Unified at some schools. If you were to tell me how privileged I was, let's take one of my privileges, my male privilege, not having to think about, my personal safety or what have you, 24/7, being able to go to a liquor store at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning without having any kind of strangeness or weirdness or what have you, just to go grab a carton of milk or what have you. Why a person would need a carton of milk at 2 a.m., I really have no idea. But I like to explain it in terms of goldfish. So this is how endemic it is. If you were to ask a goldfish, how do you like this water? Is this water nice? Then they would probably tell you, what the hell is water? Like that's how pervasive it is. You will hear words like white supremacy, and racism will be defined as individual or not be defined as simply individual and intentional prejudice, but racism like racism. Now, none of this is controversial. We have 50 years of research to back this all up. And just a word on the words all and only. And what I wanted to say about that was specifically that sometimes we have a tendency, if we are a member of a dominant group, like I am a man. So when women say the word men do this and something, I'm embarrassed to say, like 20 years, added the word all in front of it. So I was assuming that women around me were talking about all men. So that's a rejoinder that people who enjoy privilege like to say, like, oh, well, not all people, not all white people, not all men, not all, that kind, not all cops, And so I would say that of those, if you don't in fact kill people yourself, I am simply not talking about you. And I hope that doesn't sound mean. And the word only, I want to postulate it as something added after. So for instance, the most common example I hear nowadays is Black Lives Matter. And then I would say that a good majority of the people here in America add the word only to that. So Black Lives Matter only, thus my group is excluded. But let's come real with it. Let's talk about systems of power and oppression. And I would title this, Y'all Really Think This Is by Accident? So the United States Freedom Caucus is 99% white. These are just some facts. You can find this. If you read White Fragility, good for you. I would think everyone should read White Fragility, but I would say that my white brothers and sisters should especially read White Fragility. I think it sets this up nicely, and this is where I'm getting this information. The cabinet's 91% white, TV shows 93% white. Who decides the books we read is 90% white. The news we look at, 85% white. Music that's produced, 95% white. The top 100 grossing films of all time are 95% white. Our teachers, like another panelist before me mentioned, are 82% white. Full-time college professors, 84% white. Owners of professional football teams are 97% white. I'm not saying that white people are bad. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm saying that just like the goldfish, you don't see it around you because you are the default, you know? So let's kind of come at it. I want to really start with fatigue and flowers, and it kind of probably doesn't make sense right now, but a lot of you have done a full day of teaching, whether it be at the university level as a student teacher, or I don't know what the words we're using now is. I'm sorry if that's not the word that's in vogue. I sincerely apologize. Or a teacher. And so I actually have kids, if I can show you my phone, I'm not going to though, but I'm using a timer here. That's actually not working, but it is what it is. So I have kids messaging me right now. So we have unlimited access to our teachers right now during this pandemic. And so our brain isn't really wired for all that stimuli. I don't think yours is either. It creates almost like a shock, like a trauma type reaction, or maybe that's just me. But I do know that I'm more exhausted than I've ever been in my entire life, I feel like. And you don't get that like positive feeling, that interaction of being there physically with your students, with your kiddos. So as most of you, I'm exhausted. So I want to honor the time. But before I do that, I'm trying to get some flowers now. Dr. Henderson down here talked about urban vernacular. Giving flowers, I'm sorry about that, is basically giving like, oops, I'm frozen, giving like a shout out. So let me, oops, show you a little video here and hopefully it cues up. This is what it is to give flowers. And I'm sorry if this is kind of not a...
It's because we love you, bro, and you gave a lot of people...
You guys hear the sound, yeah?
Yeah.
Great.
With confidence when they didn't have confidence in themselves. You let a lot of people know that they can be themselves and still be successful. Right. I tell you that shit all the time. And it ain't just us, bro. It ain't just basketball players. You see what I'm saying? It's rappers, it's everybody. You gave them the confidence to be themselves in anything they can do, all of us, bro. And that's why people follow you, dog. And you got to accept that. And you know what I'm telling you, giving you flowers, because you mean a lot to us. We can't lose you. We just lost Kobe. We can't lose you. We're going to give you all the flowers in the world, bro, right now. You feel me? Right now. Straight up. And that's why we had to have you on the show, bro.
What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong with being you? Everybody else taken up.
Right.
What's wrong with being you? You disrespecting God.
Man, that right there. What's wrong with being you? That's what I want my students to feel. I don't want them to feel maligned by the world around them. I want them to feel what's wrong with being you. So here's a list of some professors that personally inspired me to move this work forward. And I have to take a time to say them, you know, let them know by name. Dr. Henderson and Griffin, Tatiana Cubales, and I couldn't even tell you specifically what they said that allowed us to kind of move this work forward. But we got together because of Enseñamos, and now we're getting down and trying to change the trajectory of some kids' lives here. So Dr. Soltero Lopez, and of course, Dr. Lopez, Dr. Crowd, Dr. DeWalt, Dr. Herrera. Matter of fact, the words you see above you, this is from Microsoft PowerPoint, are because of the work of Herrera and Dr. Soto Peña. So I want to give you a big idea. So give me a moment. I don't like to read slides too much, so I apologize, but here we go. So my big idea is about a house, and it's a metaphor for the schoolhouse, if you will. Guests in someone else's house feel they can never relax. by the way, kids, pull your phones out. Like if you like any of this, take a picture of it. You know what I'm saying? Like I do that all the time when I'm doing any kind of professional development, et cetera. So guests in someone else's house feel that they can never relax, never put their feet up on the table. Guests are not family whose foibles and mistakes are tolerated. On the contrary, guests must follow the house rules, such as keeping out of certain rooms, not touching anything, leaving everything in its place. And guests must always be on their best behavior. Guests have little or no history in the house they occupy. No photographs on the wall that reflect their image. Their paraphernalia, their paintings, their scents, their sounds do not appear inside the house. That's from C.S. Turner. So I just really want you to think about what kind of atmosphere you're creating for your students, you know? Also, given just the importance of this, because in Fresno Unified, where I teach, you know, Latinx students are 2/3 of our population, but comprise only 4% of our history textbooks, you know? And so that's what we are here to try to combat, so that when some of you who are teacher candidates go out there, that you get a better world than the one that we inherited. Pay it forward, you know what I'm saying? So this is my domain, man. This is like my home away from home. I love my home. As you can see, I'm resting comfortably on a couch in my office, but I feel just as much as home out here. You got your chair on the side. And I put this up purposefully. I have Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, but not just their images as civil rights icons, but also their mugshots. And the reason I do that is to kind of get a flip side of criminality, you know, and it's a way to access a conversation about systems. Because if fighting for your rights was at one point illegal, and is, I would argue, still at some points illegal, then what kind of a world are we bequeathing to those beneath us, you know? Not beneath us, but after us, I should say. This one here at the bottom is just me and my Black Panther people, because that was my Marvel dress up day. And so we took a very, very, very different one. So we got some looks, I will admit, but that is reflective of the fact that for the last 50 years, the historiography around the Panthers has been mistaken. By the way, if anybody in the chat box would know who I'm dressed up as, is Halloween. Who we are dressed up as, my little homie Vionda. I would be very impressed. Got some Zapatista swag right there for you too. So make your place an inviting space. I got hot sauce. I got cutlery. You know what I'm saying? If a person wants to come in and use whatever they can. I have rando kids popping into my classroom because I don't know if you guys remember sporks. We still use sporks. You know what I'm saying? So I have actual forks. And forks, as you know, even plastic ones are better than sporks. So a little more context. Actually, all of these slides could probably be setting the context. And please, my timer stopped working, so just come in and grab the hook and take me off if it's my time to stop. I have a tendency to talk a lot. So this people that are coming at you today are the ones who really promulgated and wrote and passed through grassroots effort the board resolution 2002, making ethnic studies a graduation requirement. And I truly, truly, truly believe, I will die on this hill, that because of that and because of the work we're still doing, it will change the trajectory of 70,000 lives here in the Central Valley. So before I tell you what ethnic studies is, I want to tell you what it does. You know what I'm saying? So what it does is create an anti-racist, explicitly anti-racist curriculum. It's interdisciplinary. So it takes into account not just history, because all of us have training as historians and history teachers. We have our credentials in that, the people who will speak to you today. It centers the voices of Black, Indigenous people of color. So what I was gonna show you a little video about what diversity studies is, because it's not what we're doing. This is not simply like, let's all hold hands and kumbaya. This is not that kind of presentation. I got nothing against that. One of my favorite experiences was, in fact, a camp where we went to with my AVID students, and it was life-changing and amazing, but that's not the point of this. So I was gonna click on this, and it's gonna take you to a ride called It's a Small World After All. So first, I wanna talk about white discomfort, and you can see a little brown person shrugging. Very much like myself, I'm not a large human being. You can't tell because I'm currently sitting down, but I'm physically small. Yeah, I don't want to offend anyone, but I cannot tell a lie, you know, which is actually a lie about George Washington. But there is no social movement on a racial tangent here. There is no social movement that has ever been promulgated, that has ever moved the needle without a healthy dose of white discomfort. I would argue that for instance, me as privileged as I am, my comfort is a good thing because someone else feels a discomfort, I should say, is a good thing, you know? That's how I learned to stop being racist, sexist, homophobic. I'm from the 90s. And so for most of my life, it's been okay to say, kill them all, you know? Literally, like I have heard people say this and I didn't correct them. I'm ashamed to say it. But the good thing is that the students I have in front of me do not have my same level of, I guess, cowardice and shame that I did. So I want to talk about positionality. Shout out to everybody in the Central Valley. It's a hard job to do. Some are more affluent than others, but we are fiercely dedicated to the liberation of the communities, the specific communities that we serve, and that specifically is south of Shaw, the historically marginalized community of Fresno, which has been purposefully segregated. One of the biggest lies cast upon us is this de jure, de facto segregation, like one is by law, one, it just happens. Nothing just happens, okay? So please, 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 please do not ascribe racist stereotypes to us or to our kids, calling us ghetto, loud, et cetera, because we or they simply have excellent advocacy skills. So in my research as a historian, by the way, if you want a really interesting story, type in my name, Uciel Jimenez, and thesis, and Fresno State will give it to you for free. But if you want the full story of this, you're gonna have to read it. So right here, we got a Max Electric lunch, and as you can tell, if you don't want a black hand to help you hand you your food, you can have that. Here's a Klan initiation ceremony at a local ballpark. This is San Joaquin Memorial hosting, you know, just a little talent show, choosing to have blackface on there. This is actually my house here at the bottom. You might not be able to tell because you can only see my face and the couch behind me. I'm in a very, very white bougie space, and that's a whole separate conversation as to how many times the authorities have been called on me for things that are not illegal, like leaving trash bins out, et cetera, or tags on your car, as opposed to maybe knocking on my door. So there's still a little element of this that says neither the said premises or part thereof shall in any manner be occupied by Asiatics or Negroes or any part of the Turkish Empire, blah, 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 skipping down, basically only persons of the Caucasian race. So we are on a very, very bedrock of white supremacy. And if you still don't believe me, let me show you the Fresno Fair in 1902. This is a game we used to play called N-word babies. By the way, future teachers, don't use that word. I know it's part of Mark Twain. I know it's part of certain primary sources. I know they'll have to look it up. Don't say it out loud. Just take my word on this. We can explain this later. So the purpose of this game, as you can probably tell, is to hit a black child who pokes their head out. Now that if you want to ascribe, this is here, you can use this as a primary source for those of you teaching US history. Right there, it's 1902 from the Hanford Sentinel. Not just that, but there were strength testers, not just N-word babies, but lung testers and other innocent amusements. So again, that's the historian part of historian, teacher, and homie. I'm not going to talk about my life too much. I just want you to know this. I was undocumented, right? And so this is why I was literally shook when I was reading. I hate to admit this because it takes some vulnerability, but when you guys were writing some stuff in the chat box, I was like, yo, were there like middle schoolers typing some stuff in the chat box? So people accuse me sometimes, oh, you're taking it too personal. Why are you bringing stuff up? Why, you know, these are just jokes. I love jokes. I've seen every stand-up special you can probably name. I just don't joke about sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, and ableism. So find other things. And there's a rule in comedy too, for those of you who are jokesters, you don't punch down. That's like the first rule you learn. So I wanted to root that in the fact that I was an undocumented person. I have had my family members of my family been deported and had deportation authorities, what we now call ICE, called on me. So we moved around from farm to farm. I don't remember a damn thing about school for the first like 6-7 years, even though I was a very willing student. And I want you to remember, never devalue the impact you have on a human life, even for the kid who's maybe only there for 2-3 weeks or a month. So from moving around, I finally settled in Southeast Fresno. And that was actually, even though it wasn't the best place to be at the time, those of you who might or might not have dabbled in the gang life know the 4800 block of Lane Avenue very well. So where I teach now is basically across the street from that. So it's yeah. So if you're a kid in the hood, maybe like I was, I need to know two things from my teachers. And when I say corny middle class teacher, I say that with love. That's why the heart's there. I would include myself now as a current corny middle class teacher. Do you give a damn? Because you can't fake that. You can fake it maybe for the first week. Oh, how was your summer? Blah, 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 blah. But you can't like the spot. It's like SHIT on a shoot. Kids smell it on you right away as soon as you walk into their house, right? Because you're in their neighborhood. Remember that. And two, they want to know, I wanted to know, can you actually teach? Not just assign work, not just fake it, not just relay information, not just pretend to explain things. Can you actually teach? You know, think about that. And what do you do when the poo-poo hits the fan? I'm really trying to clean up the language. It's very unlike me. So I don't know how much more I can get into this, but in my early career, I was all test driven. I got all these awards. And so I basically bought into this white gaze, you know? I bought into this idea. But what I was actually doing is teaching white history to brown kids and having them love it. And part of it that I now realized was systemic. I have 120 standards in 180 days. It's almost impossible to do, you know? I was myself racist, sexist, homophobic, and transphobic, so I would not be the person to teach this now. So you have to assess yourself. You have to take that high-powered perception that you apply to other people and their foibles and their mistakes and turn that little mirror onto you. Are you racist? Are you sexist? Are you homophobic? Are you transphobic? Really? And if not, then what? Or if you are, then what are you doing to fix it? So now I teach race and social justice, which is US history with an emphasis on all those things that I just mentioned, and ethnic studies. So in my mind, I have the best kids in Fresno Unified. I got the AP kids who are gonna be like, I love all my teachers. And they should probably be in the AP class, but decided to take my class that sounds more interesting, which it generally is, but not always. So yeah, I'm in a good spot. I get to teach about brown stuff. I get to teach about intersectionality all day long. So I would like to stop right now and ask what my time is so I can wrap this up in 1 minute if I have gone over, because I have a feeling that I have. So
Yeah, I think if you can wrap up, that would be
let's go
great.
ahead. Let's go ahead and wrap up. So this is the language of our resolution. It explains what ethnic studies is: interdisciplinary, centering experience of people. Now I would, yeah, it's safe to say that I'm an activist. Here I am with a few of, this is actually a student of mine. We signed up 10,000 non-propensity voters, and we were able to pass a resolution, like I said before, but my colleagues will get into that. So basically I went from this, a mainstream, you can take a picture of this if you wish, this is from Kathleen Sleater, a mainstream national narrative. There's nothing wrong with this, you know, my people did it the right way type stuff. You have an opportunity, meritocracy, which we now see as racist. Hit me up later if you don't know why meritocracy is racist, to this, right? So I'll give you another 10 seconds or so. Right, slavery was there, but now we're getting better. It's basically, hey, geography to that. Now imagine empowering your kids with that list. Well, this is what we're trying to do. My colleague Amy is including this vocabulary into the 8th grade curriculum. My colleague Jade is including this vocabulary into the 4th grade curriculum. So we really feel real strong about this. So I just want to end with this. And this is more for the teacher candidates, because you know, everyone needs to be brave, but you especially need to be brave. And maybe even for those who are chatting it up in the chat box and doing little jokes, go out on a limb. That's where the fruit is. And that's what I'll set it up. And I hope my homies will help you out here. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Ciel. I think we'll move to Lauren next. You're on mute, Lauren.
Oh, there we
There
go.
you go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Share screen. Present. Okay. So, hello. My presentation is definitely going to be centered around ethnic studies as resistance and liberation, as well as incorporating a lot of what Uziel had presented earlier on just anti-racist teaching and what that means, particularly in my context, being a Black teacher, and particularly in the context of working in Fresno Unified and the Central Valley. I teach African American Studies and Social Sciences at Edison High School. I'm going to start off this presentation grounding in James Baldwin. James Baldwin is honestly one of my favorite authors, probably one of the most prolific writers ever, I would say. And James Baldwin in 1963 gave a lecture on a talk to teachers in which he sat with teachers and explained, what do you need to know as a teacher? And so most of my presentation will provide excerpts around this talk he had all the way in 1963 and how much it still is relevant to today. So he starts with saying, let's begin by saying that we are living through a very dangerous time. Everyone in this room in one way or another is aware of that. We are in a revolutionary situation, no matter how unpopular that word has become in this country. The society in which we live is desperately menaced from within. To any citizen of this country who figures himself as responsible, and particularly those of you who deal with the minds and hearts of young people, must be prepared to go for broke. And I feel like this really does center my teaching philosophy. I have to be prepared to go for broke for my students, for the future of this country, right? And being aware and equipped with the knowledge of how do I move the work of anti-racism forward and what can I do? So a little bit about myself. I feel like it is very important for teachers going into the field, teachers remaining in the field of public education, that you're aware of who you are before you invite yourself into space with over 160 kids daily. If you're working at an elementary school level, before you're working with 36, 35, 32 kids daily. So our self-identity has a lot to do with how we are perceived and treated by both significant and non-significant others. So how we view ourselves impacts everyone else around us. So a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in LA. So I'm a Fresno transplant, or LA transplant rather. I went to private school actually during my primary years. So from kindergarten through 5th grade, I attended private schools. And my mom had a very specific reason for that. And that was because my mom wanted me to be around a very specific type of education concerning diversity. And now that word is kind of like scrubbed out, right? But for in the 90s, diversity was like the new wave, right? She wanted me to be around people of diverse experiences. And she wanted me particularly to have educators that were not just white educators. And the reason why is because identity is so important, right? So if you don't have people who necessarily look like you in a classroom, that you don't have people that are teaching you in a classroom, your curriculum doesn't look like you, how do you prepare yourself as a student, as a future adult, for how the world actually looks and how the world will perceive you? After that, I did enter into the public school sphere. But what I found myself when I entered into public school was I was, quote unquote, a bad student. And the reason why was because I was simply bored with the education. So I already knew how to do most of what my teachers were giving me, which was handouts, workbooks, we'd play Oregon Trail, just things that just were not good teaching, right? So I would act out in class. I would be the person that raised my hand and said, why are we doing this? I'm gonna call home, call her, I don't care, that type of student. But really I was calling out for attention and calling out for someone to notice, I would say a change that needed to occur. So I had that teacher who was able to recognize that I was simply bored in class and that I needed other curriculum. So she enrolled me into her AP classes, and that really changed the trajectory of my educational experience. That being said, I did move to Fresno State. I did not know where I was moving is a good way to put it. So when I first moved to Fresno, I had no idea about just like different ethnic groups that existed in Fresno. I had no idea that Fresno was based off of agriculture. I'm talking about, I was just totally blinded, right? I did go to Fresno State. I majored in history. I received, a Jewish study certificate. I studied abroad. Fortunately, all of these great experiences. I would like to give a special shout out. I did pledge Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, which is now the Vice President-elect's sorority as well, which is the first Black sorority. So shout out to any Deltas in here. They know where I'm coming from. Now to my credential experience. And I did tell Dr. Lopez prior to this that I do not mean to talk negative about the Kremen School, but I will tell you 6-7 years ago, the Kremen School did not prepare me for teaching. And I'm going to explain why very specifically. The Kremen School did not articulate anything about race during my years taking credential classes. And that ultimately, this whole webinar that you're now experiencing is so far ahead of the knowledge I had when I entered Edison High School that it's not even a comparable situation. The most we talked about was a focus on like EL students juxtaposed like toward race. And it was always like just Mexicans coming from this area and how can we get them to speak English, right? Not interrogating their experiences, not interrogating the fact that it's not just Mexicans that are speaking non-English speakers, et cetera, right? So I didn't have equipped with the knowledge necessary to do anti-racist work. I just simply didn't. So you even being on a webinar like this and the series of webinars is far better approach that the Kremen School is taking to prepare you for public education, right? Especially in California. A little bit more about myself. You have to know who you are. So I do tell students, yes, I vote in every election, right? I tell students, I enjoy concerts, I enjoy music they listen to, I enjoy traveling, etc. You have to show your students who you are for them to buy in. So a lot of teachers like to have this veil of like, I'm just gonna teach and I'm not gonna like tell my students about myself. Well, your students, then how can they learn from you if they cannot respect you? They don't know who you are. And that's a big thing in understanding culture, right? Before you even enter into a school system, culture and your self-identity. I would like to say in particular for the teachers of color, and particularly the Black teachers on the seminar or not, oftentimes when you're a teacher of color and you're a Black teacher, you're entering into a space alone. And it's gonna feel like a war zone. Like there's no other way to say it. It's gonna feel like you're at war with yourself sometimes, with other people, etc. And what do I mean by that? We all know Brown versus Board of Education, I hope, was a 1954 ruling that desegregated public schools. What often is not talked about historically is that in fact did close Black schools, which then laid off tens of thousands of Black teachers and principals out of work, right? So who then are responsible for the education of Black children? When we're looking at the data surrounding Fresno Unified, this was from a few years ago, we're seeing how many Black teachers are in Fresno Unified. So if you're just one, luckily I'm not at any of these schools where it's 0 or 1. I'm at a school with the most Black teachers, but yet I'm the only Black person in my department, right? So when you're having conversations about race, when you're having conversations about anti-racism, when you're having conversations about what did this Black student do in particular, sometimes you're the only face that people see and they'll come up to you, especially as a Black teacher, like, can you talk to this student? I don't know what's happening. That means that you're not prepared to teach Black students. And that is something that we have to point out, talk about, and clearly articulate when we're talking about anti-racist education. I would like to say though that being a Black teacher, it's not just about hiring more Black teachers, okay? Being an anti-racist is not just about being a teacher of color, because we know from the data that Uziel presented earlier that that does not actually reflect our population of teachers. So it's not just about having Black teachers for Black students. It's about what are we doing systemically to support Black teachers, but what are we also doing systemically to support Black students? How are we preparing pre-service teachers for the work that they're about to engage in? Period. And once we start to examine those systems, then we can start to question the systems. What is working and what isn't working? Because like I said, you can have a Black teacher that does not relate at all to the Black students. It's not just about being Black, it's about understanding culture, it's about understanding where your students are coming from, et cetera. And also understanding who you are as a person. So if you grew up and you've never had a Black friend, and I don't mean this like saying it casually, but like really introspectively looking at yourself, you've never had a Black person around you, right? Then what does that mean when you're walking into a space and you're teaching Black kids? If you've never experienced a friendship with somebody that was undocumented, if you never experienced, like for me, when I first moved to Fresno, I had never even heard of a Hmong person before. That's how dire my situation was. I was like, what's Hmong? Where is Hmong? What's happening? But it's you having to really look and dig deep and research who are your students? What is, Vietnam War and Hmong people in Fresno? What are all of these systems in play? And I still have to teach you as a person and still have to incorporate, like Uziel said, all of these content standards. So moving forward, I work at Edison High School. I love Edison. It's sometimes bittersweet, but I love Edison and I love the West Side. So Southwest Fresno is very diverse in culture and tradition, but it's just historically been faced with high rates of crime, unemployment, and poverty that is set up by institutional racism. That Uziel touched on, that's like scratching the surface of it, right? But even that being said, the resistance of these communities on the West Side, particularly Edison is known as Black traditionally, right? The resistance that that community has shown in the face of institutional racism is why I love working at the school that I work at. It's just what it is, right? 2,600 kids over, one tiger, many stripes, Title I, and a magnet school. So there's a whole lot going on at Edison, a whole lot. We are 90% students of color, overwhelmingly Latinx, Black, followed by Southeast Asian and white. Some clips about Edison that I love to point out are just, this is what Edison is in pictures. You know, Edison does have one of the top academic programs in Fresno. I would argue probably the Central Valley. Edison did have Hillary Clinton come and speak, right? Edison is still, though, entrenched in Southwest Fresno. And it's very difficult to ignore the issues that exist in that community and that our students face, like a school being shot up down the street. So when I lived that experience of like being on lockdown and finding out students were gunned down and literally gunned down, and the next day you drive by like nothing happened, well, now you have to start thinking as a teacher, wait a minute, I just drove by where 5 students were shot and the area is cleaned up the next day and people are still walking to that same corner store. So how do we address these issues, right? And what I will say is nothing radicalized me more than my students. So there's no program that has taught me anything. It's being in face with my students and realizing, wait, if y'all have the courage to walk out and protest gun violence in your communities, if y'all have the energy and the activism to protest DACA, then what am I doing as your teacher? Because you're teaching me more than I'm teaching myself, which is critical to understanding, once again, who are you when you enter into a classroom and who are you when you leave and interact with kids in the meantime. So remember that you are an active participant, either covertly or overtly. If you want to disassociate yourself from like, I don't have personal relationships with my students, that's probably not good teaching, in my opinion. You create your community, which means you then can change your community. You have to think, imagine, predict, visualize, and act on it. And that is a heavy lift. That is why teachers do get burnt out. It's a heavy lift. It's not all roses and like, oh, the student's writing me back and we've come so far, et cetera. You have to be an active participant in teaching. Some of the ways in which I'm an active participant, I'm going to use this as an example, is critical literacy. That's something I just heavily believe in my teaching approach. It's the ability to read text in an active, reflective manner in order to better understand power, inequality, injustice, and human relationships. And as a history teacher, it's hard pressed to talk about anything historically without confronting societal issues and examining, okay, wait, when I'm talking about, you know, the Armenian genocide, well, I need to be very cognizant that some of my students are descendants of those who fled the genocide. When I'm talking about Black history, I need to be very cognizant of, wait, some of your grandparents lived in a time where there was Jim Crow and segregation. When I'm talking about xenophobia and, you know, the Chinese Exclusion Act, I need to understand that, wait, a president is calling this the Chinese virus. And a student is sending me back an image that she learned in a textbook that was a political cartoon talking about xenophobia, but yet it's being used today. So this is the reality that our students are facing. And you have to decide where you stand in that reality. Are you going to continue to just be indifferent toward racism, or will you take an anti-racist approach? Those are the facts of the matter. To continue on, I always share this clip because, like I said, my students help to radicalize me more than anyone else. So I would like to share this clip about what critical literacy can do. Oh. Sorry. Is the sound on or?
Not yet. And I wonder, Lauren, if you have to exit out of presenter mode.
Do I have to exit out of presenter mode?
Up share, then share again and click the box at the bottom.
y'all, we're a team school, so I'm learning some things right now. I think it might have just been the sound off. So can you hear it?
Heartbreaking.
Yes.
We
I'm
got
just
you.
kind of still in shock processing this entire term.
It's been a week, but a Fresno Unified student says they're still shaken up after what a teacher allegedly said in the classroom last week. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning us in. I'm Ken Malloy.
And I'm Catherine Herr. The incident happened at Edison High School. The student says a conversation about their history book escalated, with the teacher reportedly using a racial slur in front of the entire class. CBS 47's Dennis Valera spoke with the student.
On the journey, which became known as the Trail of Tears.
First, it was about the Trail of Tears. Alina Cotton and her friend in math class saying their history book downplays the event. Cotton then got into a back and forth with her math teacher, who reportedly decided to weigh in on the subject, eventually moving on to the topic of language, what's acceptable and what's not, allegedly resulting in her teacher saying the N-word.
When my mother was a little girl, she said she would go play with the little girl across the street.
Cotton says her teacher said it again as she was walking out of the room. What really scared her about it? How her teacher said it.
She laughed and smiled at me. There was no form of professionalism, like maybe I shouldn't state this specific derogatory racial term in front of an entire class of 30 students.
Since last week, Fresno Unified has stepped in to investigate. I got this statement saying per the...
We'll stop right there. I will continue with the presentation. So that being said, in terms of, you know, radicalizing me as a teacher, right? I'm teaching these critical literacy concepts and I'm telling students, you know, we're using the district textbook that they provide. We're using that as, you know, a basis of understanding history. However, I do tell students your textbook should not be, as a historian, the only source you go to. That's dangerous. And any historian can tell you that one source and that's it is very dangerous. In doing critical literacy though with students, right? If you're referring to the Trail of Tears as a journey Indigenous people took, and then you only provide one sentence right before it about the military, that is problematic as an anti-racist teacher. Now, a conversation we were having in our classroom in history, did I predict, like I told you all, did I predict that they would be talking about just a history textbook in math class and the teacher would weigh in and then say the N-word? No, I would have never predicted that situation, but that's the reality, right? So then as myself as a teacher, how do I prepare students that if you're engaging in critical work like this level, you're engaging in your textbook, you're challenging your sources as a historian, and somebody comes out of left field and uses a slur in the middle of a room, how do you prepare students to, one, not be traumatized by that situation? How can I reflect as a teacher to be like, you know, maybe I should have sent an email to the student, et cetera. But there then comes the identity piece of who is in the room, especially as a Black teacher. So if you felt comfortable enough to tell a 17-year-old girl that your mom used to call, you know, her friends the N-word in the middle of a public education setting in a math class, then I, as a Black teacher, what is my responsibility to that student and the other students in that space? And that's why I would show this video. I failed at protecting that Black student. I did. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, but you have to be able to admit your failures and say, okay, what could I have done better, right? Why did the student go to the media about the situation? Because it wasn't being handled. And that's the systemic issues, right, around anti-racism. Moving forward with James Baldwin, I think I have like 2 more slides and I'm done. Now, the crucial paradox which confronts us here is that the whole process of education occurs within a social framework and is designed to perpetuate the aims of society. The paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated. The purpose of education, finally, is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for himself and to make his own decisions. So once again, you have to think, imagine, predict. You can't predict them all, like I just showed you that video. Visualize and act. Here are some things you can do. You can become part of fellowships like myself and my colleague Fernanda, who is going to talk next. You can challenge, you know, to think outside the box. So this was our question we came up with, is how can our school better support our students of color with an education that is intentionally relevant, meaningful, and affirming of our identities? If you're using that word anti-racist, it's dismantling and disrupting racism. So if I'm rereading this question, our real question was, in our school community, how can we provide an education that dismantles and disrupts racism? And the answer that we came up with was ethnic studies. African American studies and Chicanic studies, which Fernanda will explore more. That's what we came up with in our class. For here, this is what one of my students had to say, and I just feel like we have to have student voice here. It says, we as a people are working and learning together to soon be able to pass on this information to more Black students, to enlighten their thoughts and minds on Black history. So when I'm asked what I liked about African American studies, all I can say is everything. So these are the messages that I want to receive at the end of the day about ethnic studies, right? The answer that we came up with here. How can you do this? These are like quick. Invite your community in. I'm not from Fresno. I don't know everything there is to know about Southwest Fresno. Some days I'm learning, history about Fresno that I had no clue about, right? But there are community organizations that have been here long before you arrived in teaching and will be here long after you leave from teaching. So empower those organizations that are doing grassroots work in actual communities into your classroom, like Barrios Unidos. Uplift student voice. This was a production during Black History Month where students chose topics that they wanted to address to make changes with. One, who would have thought voting rights, right? And voter suppression. These are things that our students are noticing. Demanding decent housing. If you look in Southwest Fresno, you're not looking at overall decent housing in some areas of Southwest Fresno, not all, but some areas. Build your network. There are teachers that are racist. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. There are administrators that are racist. There are systems that protect these people. When you cry out and call out about being a Black educator, that protects racist. So sometimes you just got to fall back and do the work that you're meant to do. So surround yourself with people willing to do the work. You could start a staff book club like we did prior to the events of this summer. Read, educate yourself, gain more knowledge with coworkers that are willing to do the work with you. Build your community. Like I said, here's some organizations that I brought into my classroom. Mi Familia Vota, nonpartisan organization focused on voting rights for Latinx community. 2, Fresno Barrios Unidos, excellent local organization. The Fresno Street Saints, involved heavily on our campus, sometimes make better connections with students than all of the teachers combined. 4, Stop the Violence in Fresno. If you've been paying attention to Fresno in the last several weeks or months, there's been a huge uptick and increase in community violence, particularly gun violence against young girls of color, particularly Black girls. So if you're talking about how you're being an anti-racist teacher, you have to build community because you won't be able to teach if children are dying. That's the facts of that. I'll leave with this. James Baldwin says it much better. I begin by saying that one of the paradoxes of education was precisely at the point when you begin to develop a conscience, you must find yourself at war with your society. It is your responsibility to change society if you think of yourself as an educated person. Now, if I were a teacher in this school, I would try to teach them, know that just as American history is longer, larger, more various, more beautiful, and more terrible than anything anyone has ever said about it, so is the world larger, more daring, more beautiful, more terrible, but principally larger, and that it belongs to him. I would teach him that he does not have to be bound by the expediences of any given administration, any given policy, any given morality, that he has the right and the necessity to examine everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. All right, Fernando, you're up. You able to share your screen?
Yeah, I think so. Let's see. It's my email. That.
All right.
Okay. Man, I gotta follow Abil. She's so good. She's so good. So I'm gonna start off with oh man. My apologies if I pause here, but I would like to dedicate this presentation to my brother, um, who we lost to gun violence September 29th. Um, my brother taught me so much about just about life and humanity. Um, you know, the juxtaposition of who he was to the criminal justice system, to the education system, was in such contrast to who he was to me as my big brother, who he was to me in my home. And it taught me so much and gave me so much to think about and to reflect on um, as I began my teaching career. You know, um, he was always my inspiration for not giving up on my education dreams. He was always my inspiration for teaching, and he continues to drive who I am as a teacher, who I am as an educator, the way I treat my students every single day. And so, because of that, I would like to dedicate this to him. Um, and just a little bit about my background here, and my background of me and my brother. We grew up in Greenfield in the Salinas Valley, which those of you guys that don't know, it's very much centered on agriculture. You could think of these towns outside of Fresno, like Parlier, like Selma, like Herman. It's very similar. Greenfield is when I was in high school was 97% Latinx, Chicanx students. Um, and my just a little bit about my education experience. I was not engaged in school from a very early age. My parents divorced when I was in fifth grade. That was the first year my brother was arrested. Um, and I remember just my grades dropping significantly and being attracted to the cholo lifestyle, right? As you can see with my hairdo there. Um, and this was the way we showed pride really in ourselves was through this lifestyle. Um, and he was kicked out of school in sixth grade. I flunked everything from sixth grade on and kind of going into high school. I was lucky enough in the beginning of my senior year of high school to go to this to go to like a counselor's meeting. I was really trying to get out of class, right? And the camp program at Fresno State was there. They looked over my transcripts. They looked over what was offered through the PASS program for migrant students. And they realized that if I did like stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of books, I could get into Fresno State. You know, at that point, I was just worrying about graduating high school, but they kind of said like if I could do them both. They said I would be short a couple classes, but they had a special admission spots. They had two of them for the whole year, and I was lucky enough to get one of those special admission spots. When I started school, like I said, I was very disengaged with my education, and this continued into college. You know, there was imposter syndrome was very real, and I just found myself pretty much quitting on myself. And after 1 year, I flunked out. I flunked out of Fresno State. I think I was just, you know, put on probation after the first semester and disqualified after the second semester. I passed two classes, or one class. Shout out to Juan Felipe Herrera, who gave me a C. But what ended up happening is I came back to Hartnell. And when I came back to Hartnell, you know, and this is in Salinas, I realized I didn't want to live with my mom. So I went back to Fresno, and I went back to Fresno City College, and I decided to take the easiest classes they had available to see if I could get back into Fresno State. I did that for one semester, and they readmitted me. And then when I found myself back in Fresno State, I found I found myself completely unprepared for what was coming. You know, from somebody that hadn't done anything academically since fifth grade, just trying to get back into this college stuff was just very hard to do. And so I flunked out again. I went back to Fresno City College, and I made a decision that I was only going to take classes that I was interested in. And so one of the first classes that I took was juvenile delinquency. And in this course, I remember we learned about recidivism rates. And I remember knowing that it was, I believe, 87%. And, this made me think about my brother's experience with education, my brother's experience with school, my experience with school. And I decided that that was something that maybe I could explore more. At the same time, I also took a Chicano studies class, and I just felt something different in that class, something that was so engaging to me, something that I felt like I was learning about myself for the first time. And it was coming from somebody that looked like me, for somebody who had all white teachers for the whole totality of their career in elementary, middle, and high school, with the exception of my English learner teachers in first and second grade. This was exciting to me. This was exciting to me, and all of a sudden, my approach to education shifted. Uh, my engagement with education shifted, and I started getting A's. I was able to transfer back into Fresno State. I like to tell people that I'm probably the only person to get accepted 3 times without getting a degree. There has to be a plaque somewhere, right? Um, and after I graduated, because it took me so long, I really needed to stop and take a break and kind of make some money so I could go back and teach for free, right? At that point, I had decided I wanted to be a teacher after getting my degree in Chicano studies and history. I wanted to be a history teacher, but really it wasn't anything political. I wanted to be a history teacher because I wanted to be that cool teacher, was the way I pictured it in my head. I wanted to coach football, and that's really what I was aiming for. Uh, so in my head, it didn't matter what credential program I went to. Um, and then that summer, I went floating in the American River, and then I decided, you know what, I'm going to apply to Sac State. So I applied to Sac State, and the first day I get there, the opening statement was from this guy, Dr. Jose Cintron, who says, "This will be a social justice centered program. If you do not want to engage with that, if you do not believe in that, then you could leave right now." And my eyes opened up, and I was engaged, right? And this program was very centered on a few tenets. Um, Teaching is political. Um, all teaching is political in what we do, what we don't do, what we say, and what we don't say. Um, they are all very much political acts. And so once I got that out of the way, then I really started thinking about, where am I going to stand on this political spectrum, right? Um, a few other things we learned was, teaching critical thinking is essential to good teaching. You can't teach unless you're teaching critical thinking, kind of very similar to what Lauren was saying. Another thing, critically thinking by community is essential, and actual teaching. There's no point in us learning about stuff that doesn't impact us, etc. Right? And then a couple other things happened that really shaped who I am as a teacher, and that made me reflect a lot on my life and the life of my brother. Principally was ethnic studies now. Um, they kind of gave everybody projects of presentations to do, and um, I received ethnic studies now. This was back in 2015, and I learned about some amazing stuff that some people were doing out in LA, out in San Francisco, out in San Diego, and just the beauty of having students engaged in their education, right? And I just thought about how beautiful that would have been if that would have been me in school, right? If I would have had ethnic studies in my education, right? And it made me dream. To be real, it made me dream about the possibilities. A couple other things that really kind of hooked me and stayed with me and planted a seed in my mind was, I forgot to say this here about this program. Sac State as a program, wow, it's so amazing, and it taught me so much about what it means to be a teacher. These people were teachers and activists at the same time, right? You have people like Dr. Jose Cinton, who just retired, Dr. Margarita Berta Avila, Dr. MBA, who writes about student activism. So they weren't just about the talk in the classroom, they were taking real action, right? And so that modeled to me what it means to be a teacher. Lastly, this scene from Precious Knowledge that I will show to you guys, Precious Knowledge is a documentary about Arizona's attempt to ban the Mexican American Studies program at Tucson Unified. I recommend it to everybody. But there's a very specific scene with this man here on the top right. This is one of my prized possessions. This is Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade. Yes, I fanboyed. I said like 2 words and I probably stuttered like 15 times. But let me show you guys the scene. And this scene spoke to me so much and really reframed my whole experience in education.
I notice, especially in regular history classes, is students who really just don't give a shit about what they're studying historically. I mean, their relationship to learning is just kind of dysfunctional in general. And it's not of a particular ethnicity, but they are lazy. They are unengaged. They really are. Learning has just become irrelevant to their lives completely. They're just damaged. They're culturally damaged.
So step 1 is to identify the problem. Now, I think the way that you've cast kids is so funny, because if you read the literature historically, it's exactly the way it talked about you when you were a kid. Right? It's exactly the way they talked about me when I was a kid. Right? We were apathetic. We were disengaged. The same narrative about the deficiency of our children has run the history of public schooling in the United States. Right? And we just changed the way we explain our inability to engage kids, right? There's nothing wrong with kids. I've never met a kid with a dysfunctional relationship to learning. I've met a lot of kids with a dysfunctional relationship to school.
Dang, that got me right there. That ending really made me reanalyze everything that I had experienced in school. I had been called lazy so many times. I had been called, that was a daily thing for me. You're lazy, you don't care, etc. And just the way he reframed it just created a question for me. How do I engage students in my class, right? And this became something that was a really a mission for me when I started teaching, right? So as I started teaching, like I had a way different experience than Bill had. I felt like I was prepared to talk about some very difficult things and to address them. They kind of gave me a blueprint, but it's 2 different things to have the blueprint and to implement it. And so I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a background on what happened in my journey, right? So first of all, I made a discovery that it's not just what you talk about, it's also how you talk about it. How do you frame the things that you're talking about within your class, right? I was lucky enough to teach race and social justice in US history beginning 2016 to the present. But that first year, I made some major mistakes, right? I taught US history with a heroes and holidays approach you could look up from Dr. Banks, where he talks about how sometimes we just add marginalized people into this history as an attachment, as a side attachment. And we weren't really thinking critically. That wasn't something that I had in my toolbox just yet. But one thing that did happen due to my unpreparedness to teach this class is I really went in deep on learning about race history, etc. And it just blew up in my mind. Like I just had to get more and more and more. I was always trying to add more to the tool belt, and this is something I'm going to recommend for you all. You guys are here at this conference, so obviously you guys already kind of know about this. But I started hitting the circuits of these conferences, the conferences that I learned about actually at Sac State, Teachers for Social Justice Conference, which they're going to have something on Saturday here, and you could check that out. But I learned so much there. The Multicultural Education Conference at Sac State. The ARE runs an annual statewide conference, the Association of Raza Educators. And then there's this one right here from 2017, where I had to put on here because it was so important to my development. This was a combo multicultural education conference and an ethnic studies summit. And I learned so much about how it is that people were creating and developing these ethnic studies programs, and I learned so much about the pedagogy, etc. And it was just a huge inspiration. The networking I was able to do there has been so invaluable, even to today. And you get these lesson ideas, right, in these little workshops. And so one of those lesson ideas that I received really shifted the way I looked at my education and really shifted the way I plan my units, and something that I think we need to consider as you guys get deeper into developing your curriculum. So this, and I got this in one of the workshops at the Teachers for Social Justice Conference that said, that was using the 3 eyes of oppression to analyze the institution of slavery, right? But then it was also paired with the resistance, right? And this became a story and a unit, not about oppression, but about this resistance to this oppression, about strength, about community, and about activism, right? And at just the responses I got from my students at the end of this unit was way different than anything else I had experienced. And this just forced me to reimagine all my units, right? And I came up and I realized that you must restructure the whole unit and center the experience of these marginalized communities, okay? Not just talk about it as an attachment, but really center that experience. A couple other things that really impacted me was this Men's Alliance class. Men's Alliance class is a class offered throughout Fresno Unified for so-called at-risk youth. They have it for boys and they have it for girls. And pretty much they put about 20, 25 struggling students in there. And for me, this was something that was very, man, I would call it re-traumatizing, right? Because it was reliving my experience as a student. The curriculum was the Heroes and Holidays approach that I just talked about right now. It was a leadership book, which included all the usual suspects, MLK, Cesar Chavez. There was Dwight Eisenhower in there. And then there was another curriculum called School Connect that was really centered on this idea of like teaching kids that they just need grit, right? So I was like, I'm going through here and I'm getting to know all these classes. I've been getting to know these students in these classes. I make a few realizations, and I really learn how to build relationships with disengaged students, right? And I realized that I have to be vulnerable and that I have to really engage these kids with love. And that was something that now transfers over to all my classes and with all my students. Just the ability to let your heart engage with these students, and the students always responded, right? And what I learned is that these kids already had grit, that these kids had been through so much and were still in class, and I had to learn how to celebrate that, right? I wasn't very, well, I would say us as a class, we weren't very successful academically, but it really gave me that sense of urgency that I had to do more. I had to do more, and I had to do something to change the system, right? So one of the things that happened was we started a Metchat club on campus. These students were amazing. I was lucky enough to get some students that really pushed me. That really pushed me to engage in community and really pushed me on this community activism stuff, right? I was never in activism going through college. I mean, there was this one time I was trying to talk to this girl when we were in college, but other than that, that wasn't something that I had done. And these students really looked at issues that were affecting them and refused to disengage, right? This is one of the first things we did that kind of that opened up my mind. It was after the election of Donald Trump, and when there was, ICE driving around, we pushed the school district to adopt a safe haven resolution protecting our undocumented students. We showed up with like 1,500 signatures. We showed up for multiple meetings, and we were able to get it approved. And then that kind of expanded, right? My colleague Lauren, who we're classroom like neighbors. I've been lucky enough to start my whole career with her, right? And she was in BSU, and we started thinking about how is it that we could create a Black and brown collective consciousness, right? And we started doing stuff together, voter registration. We did some stuff with Dolores Huerta Foundation and some presentations that they brought out. And then we started having these chosen conversations about racism in school, and just providing a space for this dialogue, right? For this dialogue. And this is something that it resulted like in this student walkout, right? We had some students do this walkout, and the classroom is packed. I don't know. This picture doesn't do it justice how many people were in there, but we had a presentation from the teachers union about unions, about their rights as students in the event of a strike. This is when we were talking about a strike, and you just saw the kids really engaging with things that mattered and things that impacted them in their community, right? And just a little side note, there's always pushback, right? So that's something I want to tell you guys that you got to prepare for as you start engaging in this work. You're going to have questions like, why were students making posters in your classroom and providing markers? Why was the teachers union presenting to students in your classroom, right? This was all done at lunchtime, and but the questions came, right? And the label came. I believe me and Beal are known as agitators there at the school district office. But we continued looking for ways to change the system. And in 2017 is when we started Chicano Studies. And this is where I started implementing all these things that I had learned, these lessons as I learned through my journey into this course, right? And we did different things like the community cultural wealth tree, where we celebrated community, right? Celebrated the way our communities uphold us, celebrated the way our communities like give us power, right? And we also use this to analyze the story of guest speakers, right? So I lined up guest speakers to come in, and we analyzed how they use their community cultural wealth to get to where they were. My first guest speaker was Dr. Lopez here. Thank you so much. And it was so powerful for the students to engage in this conversation and to engage it in this way. Another thing we did was use critical race theory to analyze racial inequalities. And then what we did is put these racial inequalities on the board, and they had to tell me how they were connected. So we were really analyzing systemic racism in the class in a very authentic way. And these projects were amazing. And another thing was just place students as part of the movement. This is something they learned the history of ethnic studies, and they learned the history of ethnic studies here in Fresno Unified. And we very explicitly point out that they are part of this movement. And just the responses from the students has been amazing. I think we're short on time here. And I just want to throw this out here. This is one of the last text messages I engaged one with my brother. As you can see in the top, that is, he was asking me why I'm always busy, so this was on the day we got ethnic studies approved. I sent it to my brother, and this is what he said, excuse the language, right? He said, that's badass. It's really good for our people and all people really that this is happening. And congratulations to you for accomplishing that for the raza, right? So I just want to throw this out there because this is ethnic studies is not just for our students, it's for our community, right? And I think that's something that we can't separate. That is the end of my presentation, and
I'm gonna transition us into the PowerPoint if you could present it. We're gonna try, we went over time a little bit, so we apologize. So we're gonna try to speed through these examples of ethnic studies once Fernando's able to present on this.
We talk a lot, y'all. I apologize.
So I'm gonna try to lead. Could you, and unfortunately our colleague, Amy could not be here. She had a bit of a personal issue. So I do think it's important to talk about her and her classroom and stuff like that, knowing her as an educator. I don't know if it's just my screen, but it's like kind of pixelated or something. But if it's not for you all, I think knowing her background, first and foremost, Amy is an amazing educator at bringing in people from the community to talk to her 8th graders. And if you know anything about Fort Miller has a very long history of systemic racial issues. And I don't work there, so I cannot point them all out to you, but that was basically a part of her presentation. Moving forward, she actually was able to introduce ethnic studies at the middle school level. The only previous middle school that had ethnic studies, thanks to community organizers, was Gaston in the West Side. So now it's more inclusive now to add Fort Miller and Torones. CLASA was an organization she established with her students to support Black and Brown students in student advocacy. And that's really, really important, as we've all just shared. You can go forward, Fernando. Oh, I think this is an important note. Go back really quick, Fernando. Back one more time.
This video.
So no, share it. Don't play it. So a part of the story that she shared with me, and I think that she would be open to, is a part of her shirts even. So she had a Chicana X shirt for her CLASA club, and it had a fist. And even staff members at her job site were questioning what the fist meant, right? So as you're entering into this system of education, it's very, very, very serious and critical that you are aware of the students that you are serving, and you are aware of their culture and their identity and what fists mean, right? She's just an amazing educator. You can move forward. You can move forward. So challenges and tools of anti-racist teaching. Is it like pixelated? I don't know, because on my screen it is. Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah, in the chat box, everybody's commenting on the fact that it's quite pixelated.
Can you exit the screen, Fernando?
Try it again.
Yeah, try it again. Maybe. No, it's still pixelated.
You have a copy?
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can find it. Sorry about that. So we were going to talk about challenges, right, that we face as ethnic studies teachers and anti-racist teachers, and some of the things that we noticed that we could resolve. Oh, perfect. I don't know who brought it up, but perfect. So that being said, first and foremost is interpersonal oppression. So racist interactions that we've all experienced, staff to staff, staff to student, microaggressions, which I just call racial abuse, right? Is something somebody says as a microaggression, but you hear it every day, right? Or off of the cuff. I call them little like nicks, right? To a person's spirit. And just to be totally cognizant, some of the things that my Black coworkers have been told is like, oh, you have braids in, I'm loving your ghetto hairstyle. So if you are a teacher, and this is what you tell another staff member, you can only imagine what they say and do with students, right? In terms of institutional is racist curriculum that we've all pointed out. Uziel in particular pointed out, right, that only 4% is reflected of Latinx population, but 2/3 exist in Fresno Unified. There's no protocols, accountability, or process to address racist behavior. And I can stand on that and say it very clearly. There's little to no financial support, supplies to support anti-racist education. So a lot of the times when you are seeking out to be an anti-racist educator, whether it's PLs, whether it's professional development, et cetera, sometimes you do have to put your own money behind the support of these issues. Sometimes there's inauthentic support. When we began very early on in our ethnic studies process, you know, we had an administrator that was very supportive of our classes, and then there was a transition, and then we had administrators that were not as supportive, right? So there's true support means like you're coming in and you're looking at what does our ethnic studies class do? To me, that's true support, right? So you could glow and say, yeah, we have this at our school, but like you've never even sat into an ethnic studies class before, right? So those are some of the issues that we see. The lack of understanding what anti-racism truly means. And then here are the ways in which we can resolve, or here's some of the results of some of these oppression, right? Racial battle fatigue means that just simply being a person of color in a space of education is exhausting. You're not only worried about your teacher, right? Like my teaching life, you're also concerned about the racist things that your colleagues do and say. Sometimes it's even your students, depending on where you are going to work, right? So it's not even all Fresno Unified Schools, I'm sure, on here. I've had incidences where students have said things that were racist to me. They exist, right? Teacher push out, particularly if you look at the rates of teachers of color, but teacher push out is real, right? We talked earlier about unions. While I have some issues, I fully back my union for this reason. Workers need to collectivize, period. That's just my belief, right? And how do you get involved in your union to push that work forward, right? So teacher push out, overwork, lack of compensation oftentimes, like, hey, could you do A, B, C, and D, but then not want to pay, right? And then reinforcing trauma. So what does it look like when you have a teacher say something or do something racist, and yet you're of that same race, right? Or you have a teacher say and do something that is racist and you're not of that same race. How do you then speak up for that student, right? So in terms of like English only and English standards, and sometimes our conversations around EL students, how can you push beyond your own scope of understanding and challenge these systems? So these are some of the things that we've done. Sorry, I don't want to be too long-winded. One, the first thing that we always say is call it out. So if you are a white educator in particular, you have a lot more leeway to call it out. I will say as a Black person, I've been told as an educator, why are you offended? Why are you upset? Are you really that mad, etc.? And if I say, yeah, I'm really that mad, there's stereotypes that go along with that, right? So call it out. 2, file formal complaints. File them. They may not go anywhere, but file them so they could be on record. The process is not an easy process, but if you let racism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, elitism, etc., continue without a formal complaint, you are not stopping the institutional oppression that may exist. Create a network of anti-racist educators. You might not find them at your school site. You might not find them in your district. You may have to search way far beyond, but find them. Investigate district policies and curriculum. Deconstruct material to represent an explicitly anti-racist curriculum. You can use the district curriculum, but as a historian, especially as an ethnic studies teacher, you need to be incorporating various sources, period. Use community support and grants, become an advocate for your students, place your students above district mandates. Teaching outside of the walls of your classroom is also important. For us, I know that before we all came together collectively, and I can say this like little positive tidbit about the district, they have been supportive in the work that we're doing going forward, but it does take grassroots effort to push the institution forward. Right? The institution is not going to like capitulate to anything, right? There has to be a grassroots movement of anti-racist educators pushing the work forward. Get connected and reach out to your community as well. Sorry, that was a lot, but I think that's next. I think we're good. So ethnic studies, what it is, it centers student voices, it centers student experiences, it connects students to their history, and not just from their perspective, right? Like from the perspective of people of color, the history of power and resiliency. It is relevant education. It is real world connection. It's all the CSTPs that, you know, the state is looking for, right? It allows students to have a safe space to discuss race, ethnicity, systems of power, police brutality, current events that are happening in our nation right now and beyond. And it equips students with tools to change, to become activists and agents of community within their own community. So heavy focus on shifting local issues, right? You could skip where we are now. Go ahead and skip. Go ahead and skip. So our plan is to incorporate K through 12 ethnic studies framework. We would like to say that if you would like to join the framework, we can drop join the advisory committees that are open to the public. I believe the deadline is tomorrow. We can definitely drop those links. We need community, we need parents, and we need students to be on this advisory team, because that is how you get the district to shift. And the district does want to hear from the community, and we need people to back that work. Some of the student examples of what you can do in your classroom. In African American studies, we talk about privilege and power, particularly the lack of privilege that a lot of Black males in particular face in society when they move about society, right? So we have done oral history projects which we're examining just the Black male experience from ages 18 all the way, you can see on the left-hand corner, somebody that was 93 years old. And some of the threads and issues of how little the Black male experience has truly changed in our society. So that's something that we've done in my classroom. Another thing we've done, and I've gotten student permissions to show their faces and to show their pictures. So that's really key. This is something that a student has written that is not Black, but is in my African American Studies class. It is important to be informed about global events of oppression, to be educated and acknowledge the privilege we have. Oftentimes I want to address everything, but then feel insecure as I feel I'm playing into a savior complex. However, I am not belittling or worsening the issue. I acknowledge that I have privilege and I am better off than most. To be informed is to be one step closer to ending oppression and calling for equality. You don't want to go into something not knowing anything about it, as you'll be uneducated and speak and promote the wrong ideas. Black Lives Matter everywhere is important to acknowledge, as our society as a whole is rooted in anti-Blackness ideology. Everyone's basis is a social construct that was made up. We have to acknowledge the value of Black lives and not be indifferent toward them and demean them. There aren't just Black lives in the United States. There's Black lives in Africa and Europe, Latin America, etc. And all of them have been marginalized and discriminated against. And then it's the action piece. What can students do? Sign petitions, educate your family and friends, use social media to post and platforms. These are the real life things that we do in ethnic studies, right? This is like, to me, I wish I could have even learned this at my high school or even in college beyond taking an actual ethnic studies class. This is from a student that Amy has in her class, a TikTok video in which she's using if y'all don't know what TikTok is, it's like a social media platform that kids use. And here a student is talking about racism and stereotypes, an 8th grader expressing what these ideologies actually are. There's just a picture of somebody's face.
What is racism? Racism is having prejudice or discrimination towards a particular race. Meanwhile, stereotypes means having an overgeneralized belief about a particular group of people. So, for example, a stereotype is saying that women are too emotional or that all guys are messy and clean. So now that we got all of that out the way, how do these two connect? Well, racism can be used in stereotypes. These are called racial stereotypes. An example of a racial stereotype would be saying that all Asian kids are good at math or that all Latinos are immigrants. Even though we all know these aren't true, people still say them. So next time you hear someone using racial stereotypes, be sure to educate them. Racism is wrong, and if we allow people to spread hate, we leave less room for.
So that's such a phenomenal example. I think I'm such a phenomenal example of, hopefully I'm not repeating, anti-racism in practice.
Okay, so we're getting pixelated here. Sorry. I'm not really sure what's going on. Go ahead and present that. Can you all hear me okay? All right. Just a little bit more student work. This is pretty much just like straight up, I guess what we would call quotidian. Oh, there's a vocab word for today. So day-to-day examples of what you might do as an assignment, you know? So Fernando, go back a little bit. There you go. So in a digital format, what I do is I have little YouTube videos about stereotypes, for instance. And so then they just go around taking notes, and then we have a class discussion the next day. And I have found that small videos are your best friend. You know, if you can find a small explainer for something and something that isn't super cognitively demanding, but that asks them to do something at certain lengths of time, then they're like, here, you pause it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So go ahead and click backward, I think it was. I can't really tell. There was a, yeah, so, oops, one forward, I'm sorry. Yeah, so this is, my bad. All right, I'll talk about this one. Maybe we don't have to talk about each and every assignment that maybe is done. So I had my students, my high school students at Sunnyside, create a pamphlet of, let's say they had a university. They were the head or the dean of a university. And then so after we did some historical research on the need for ethnic studies and the history of ethnic studies, like a timeline or what have you, which is another thing that I was going to show, but ran out of time with, then they created a pamphlet basically, yeah, just like an informational pamphlet, and then where they found their information on the right. You know, you can go to different universities and they'll have their course listing. So that was kind of nice. And a lot of them got really excited about it, you know. They're like, oh, you know, I have mostly seniors in my class, a few juniors, but mostly seniors. And they're like, I get to take this stuff, you know. Women's literature, you know, a lot of my female students were quite excited about the offerings specific to a person's gender, but also, you know, their ethnicity. So click forward. I think that might be it actually for my student work. We also did an ethnic art project, which we kept kind of going back and forth, but that was the picture of the Hmong girl there. Yeah. And then I don't know who wants to talk about our 7 C's.
I think, did you want us to answer the questions live or just in the chat, Dr. Lopez?
Yeah, so let's answer them live, just because folks on Facebook Live can't see the question.
Okay, cool.
But do we want to put up the quick flyer? I know there was an announcement we wanted to make.
Oh, yeah.
If we can put up that slide 4 flyer. There you go.
So Jamie Nelson is an Indigenous man in Fresno, and he had wrote a petition following the incidents this summer, particularly around Black Lives Matter, about changing the Fresno High mascot. The Fresno High mascot is a Native American mascot that are called the Warriors. And we do not have enough time to get into Native American imagery and the racism that is centered around that, that's centered around warriors, braves, redskins, etc. But I would like to just say that anti-Indigenous racism cannot thrive in a public institution and should not thrive in a public institution. If we are going to call ourselves anti-racist educators, if we are going to stand by and say that we are an anti-racist district, then the warrior mascot needs to be removed. Native American culture, Indigenous culture is not a costume to wear. It is not a mascot. These are a group of people who have been systematically, institutionally, interpersonally maligned, and this mascot needs to be gotten rid of. I will leave with this little one note. If you're interested in more context, what does it look like when you have a school named after Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Riders, and have known what Teddy Roosevelt has said about Indians, particularly saying the only good Indians are the dead Indians, playing a sport against the Fresno High Warriors. So there is a town hall discussion, which I personally, just speaking for myself and not anyone else on this panel, is racist in and of itself to have a town hall to discuss the humanity of Indigenous people to this land that continue to try to resist and survive in this institution. But that being said, you can go and ally and in solidarity to support people calling for systematic change and an end to racist iconography. I hope that summed it up. Yeah.
And we put the petition, Lauren, in the chat. So we actually dropped the links.
Yes. In the chats, there's Valley Natives for Change as well on Facebook. I believe they're going to be making a decision as a school board in December. It's very important to write the school board, to have your voices be heard, because public education is for the public. So I personally would not want my tax dollars going to support this level of racist bigotry. Hopefully you all feel the same and we'll go out and make the change necessary.
Thank you, Lauren. So we'll take some Q&A. So I'll let you all go on ahead. And I know, Lauren, there are a couple that were directed to you, but definitely let's open it up for anyone else who may want to weigh in.
I saw some questions on the first one, when Black educators have issues with racist colleagues and administrators regarding violations against civil rights, complaints about discrimination and work retaliation, what do you suggest when FTA does not work? I'm just gonna be totally honest. I have not answered that question myself. So I do support the union. I do feel like some of these issues do need to be addressed. I personally feel like when I see other unions in California and how much more progressive they are, I do sometimes feel like, oh, I need to leave Fresno. Like I need to get down with some unions that understand the plight of teachers of color, right? That being said, I do feel like I, as a person, could try to take some more proactive roles in my union, in speaking out to the representatives of my union to address some of these issues. But yes, the union is not there to help teachers of color, teachers that are LGBTQ in my experience, and I can only speak for my experience. They did offer me a representative, which was very helpful. In a complaint for a formal complaint that I filed, that was helpful to have that type of representation, but the union is not your lawyer, right? So the union can only do what it handle contract issues is what I was told, versus not understanding that racial harassment at work perhaps should be a contract issue. So I don't have an answer for that per se just yet, but I definitely think talking to your school representatives, talking to the FTA, and really, even if we could develop a coalition within the FTA to address some of these issues, would be really beneficial, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna add on to, just exactly what you said, Lauren. You know, we're talking about systems. Fresno Unified is a system. FTA itself is a system, one that, yes, protects me, but also protects the racist teacher doing racist things, saying racist things. And so if we don't have a voice of people within our union saying, yo, we can't just shuffle people around if they say racist things, and we're gonna move them to the site where they can say it and the parents aren't gonna complain about it, or the kids aren't gonna complain about it. Like, that's a no-go. And so I also don't wanna say anything like crazy, you know, that I probably have some of my employers watching perhaps, but no, we definitely have areas of growth within our own union to be like, yo, we can't really allow this kind of stuff to go on. And I feel as though I strongly appreciate the things that we do talk about as a union regarding benefits, et cetera, but I think that if we bring that up and if we expand the voice of the union to include things like that, and not just piecemeal tokenism, et cetera, but like an actual transformative look at these kinds of systemic issues, that I think a lot of teachers of color and white teachers will definitely have our back with that kind of thing. And so I just don't think we've ever tried it, to be honest with you. It's just easier to ignore it, and we're not down for that anymore, is how I would feel.
Let's get that racial justice caucus going. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I can say true. It's exactly what Uziel said. I'm trying not to be like biased. I think that the union does do great things. FTA has come a long way, but I do think we have to try something different, and that is on us to do it, for sure.
So there's a question about untenured teachers here. What advice, suggestions would you provide to a first and second year untenured teacher as they navigate racist, oppressive campus environments?
I would say, if I can kind of touch on that, I would say two things. One, keep your receipts. You know, if what you're saying is historically factual and is within the California content standards in some tangential kind of way, like if it's related to it, then you're doing your job, you know. And two, I don't know why I'm holding my fingers up that long, but two, I would say that, how can I put this? CTA has language around that. And so if you're in any way affiliated with CTA, even if you're not, because I know Clovis doesn't have a union, et cetera, then you can use that as protection as well. But definitely keep your receipts. Like, we do some things that people might question, as you might, and each of us probably has mountains of stories of things that to an outside observer could be like, what is that? Or emails that we get from parents who are still in a very tokenist, colorblind, or even in some instances, white supremacist ideal. And at some point, you just got to say, if you're not willing to inform yourself, I really don't have time for you. And if you don't have an established record of documenting and caring about my oppression, then please do not make commentary about those of us trying to change and resist this system. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but yeah.
To follow that up, I don't know if Fernanda was going to speak. To follow that up, I definitely think 100% keep your receipts. I follow up through email. I'll be like, hey, do you remember when you asked me this question? I write it down of the things that people say to me off the cuff, et cetera. And I follow it up with email. I do think it is important though. And that's the hard part about racism, right? Like, it's so institutionalized that we still got to eat, right? Like, as a teacher, I still got to work. I still got to feed my family. I still got to pay for my Netflix. All of it's all related, right? But I will say I was way more cautious in my first and second year of teaching. And if I could go back, what I would have done a little bit differently is I would have worked a little bit more to build my community to where it is today. So I wouldn't go like full fast forward with students and do like all of this amazing work. It takes time to get there. But in your first 2 years, focus on what you can control. So if you're untenured, focus on like, hey, just start a book club. Start small. Like, hey, I'm going to read this book. Are other teachers willing to engage in this book? Then you could kind of scope out and see what teachers are like down for like the journey and not down for the journey. And you might find 2 teachers, but at least that'll be your community and your network to start making some changes, because it is very, very hard to stand alone. And in particular, if you're at a school that is not unionized, that's like the biggest thing I could say. I don't know if I would survive in a school that's not unionized. I don't know.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
No.
And I would say, just like Lauren said, you got to keep your eyes peeled, check out who's saying what. And not everybody's going to be your partner in everything, but you could have some partners in certain things. And then also, like, you can expand your community, you know, it doesn't just have to be people on campus. You know, it could be people from, like, you know, only me and Lauren are on the same campus, right? Luciel and Amy are in different schools, and they're still, you know, our co-conspirators, as Dr. MBA would say, that I just found out she's in the audience. But yeah, co-conspirators. And then also, you know, even at these other conferences, right? Like, you'll find allies that sometimes, like, you don't even expect them to be helpful to you until all of a sudden, like, they are, right? Like, I was going to all these conferences, and then all of a sudden we started this ethnic studies work, and these people started like coming back into my lives from like 4 years ago that I met at one conference in LA or whatever, right? So just keep on building that community, keep on networking, and keep on building, right?
All right, well, we're about 5 minutes left here. I think we covered the questions. I know there was a question. I'll let one of you, Lauren, Fernando, Uciel, if you want to answer it regarding the Fresno High School mascot. Yeah, we will be making this available to folks. Definitely reach out to these folks if you have more questions. Endless wealth of knowledge here, and I just want to thank all of you for being here and wishing Amy well. But I'm glad that we were able to address some of her, or bring up and give a spotlight on some of her work as well. I'm just going to kind of close us out. Again, I wish we had more time. I know that many of you also have to get on and do other things. So as always, we do have an exit survey. Please fill it out. I think getting your feedback is really informing where we're going with this series. It's been an amazing, amazing run. I could not have thought, I could not have predicted or envisioned a better closing out of the session than this group of phenomenal educators. I think you all have just, wow, the chat is just going wild here, and I thank you all. But please share your input. If you're one of our pre-service teachers or grad students or someone who's wanting to get the certificate, this is a part of that completion. So this will be the last survey, and then we'll start submitting. I know there were questions about folks wanting to get certificate of completion. So please, you can put your phone up to the screen and get that QR code. And then I think we dropped this, the link in the chat. The other thing I want to do is, if we can go to the next slide, I just really want to give acknowledgement to our team. We've been doing these series. This is our second major series like this. And behind every successful series, there's an amazing group of people. And I want to just, hopefully you can stay on for just a couple minutes so that I can just acknowledge the phenomenal Enseñamos team, who without them, this stuff would not flow. So I think we can just throw on, I think if we turn off mics, I think whoever's mic is on will show up. Why don't we first start out with Dori Trujillo, who's our undergraduate project assistant. Dori, if you can turn your mic on, I think your picture will appear.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here. And like Dr. Lopez said, is the whole team that comes together to provide all of this for you all. And so thank you so much for providing the space and for showing up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dori. Next, we'll have Gladys, who's been running, I think, helping us out with a lot of chat. Gladys, can you turn your mic on?
I'm here, Dr. Lopez. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. And thank you to all of our speakers for being so authentic. We're definitely taking this to heart and applying it in our daily lives and our teaching. So you are changing lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Gladys. Jessica Lorea is on here as well. If she can turn on her mic and say something, Jessica.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. And I want to thank all of our speakers for bringing such a wonderful series.
Thank you, Jessica. And Maribel Bravo Mendoza, if you can turn your mic on and say hi, Maribel.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you to all our presenters, our panelists, to all our attendees, our director, and the whole team. We couldn't have done this without everybody's help. And thank you all so much for staying involved during this really difficult time in our community, our world. But thank you for being here, and thank you for putting in the effort for changing this corner of our world. So thanks.
Thank you, Maribel. I also want to thank and acknowledge all of the speakers and the colleagues who moderated. We just have an amazing group of faculty in the Kremen School, and I am just honored to be able to do that kind of work that Lauren and in particular, I know highlighted, that is so critical to our ability to thrive in this profession. So Dr. Ana Soltero Lopez, who's just been amazing cornerstone for the Enseñamos initiative. Thank you. Dr. Maria Goff, was very instrumental in the very beginning, helping to moderate. Dr. Earl Aguilera, who also moderated. Dr. Heather Horsley, Dr. Amber Crowell, Dr. Patrick DeWalt, Dr. Michelle Soto Peña, Dr. Luz Herrera, Dr. Mario Banuelos, Dr. Rohit Mehta, Dr. Sergio Fernando Juarez, Dr. Raymar Henderson, and Dr. Dominiqua Griffin. Thank you. Without you, this would not be possible. And I just cannot thank you enough for taking the time and for providing this space and for contributing. Today's panelists, Uciel, Lauren, Fernando, Amy, you are here with us. I thank you. And with that, I want to end by following in the steps of my brother Fernando and everyone on the panel today who just gave acknowledgement to family and the reason and what brings us here. And as director of this initiative, the work that we do, and in my particular case as a leader, the things that we do are very much informed by our community and our family. And, for me, I just want to give honor and acknowledge my father, Evo Corralejo Lopez Sr. He is with me in every way. He was fundamentally one of my first teachers, and he continues to teach me. He continues to speak and guide me. And Without him and without my parents and my family, this would not be possible. My contribution would not be possible. So I end with that. I give you that, and I just thank you all. So I feel like we should give I don't know, an applause or something. But if you're listening on Facebook Live, thank you for being here, and thank all of you. And I think that's it. I think we are all done, Maribel.